April 3, 1961. West Berlin. The rain hammered against the windows of the small apartment on Kurfürstendamm, each drop a metronome counting down to betrayal. Claire Hartwell stood in her darkened living room, a photograph trembling in her hands. The image showed Stefan Richter, the man she loved, the man whose breath she knew better than her own, entering a gray building on Normannenstrasse in East Berlin. Stasi headquarters. The photo had been slipped under her door an hour ago. No note, no explanation needed. Her handler's message was clear. The architect who sketched dreams on napkins over coffee, who whispered poetry in German against her neck, who made her believe love could exist in a city carved in half by concrete and wire, was a lie. He was an operative, and she was his assignment. Claire's reflection stared back from the rain-streaked glass, a ghost of the woman who had crossed into West Berlin 3 years earlier, full of purpose and conviction. Now, at 32, she understood that the cruelest weapon in espionage was not the gun or the poison pill, but the human heart, weaponized and aimed with precision. The photograph slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor. Outside, the divided city pulsed with its nightly rhythm, searchlights sweeping the death strip, dogs barking at shadows, lovers separated by ideology meeting in desperate embraces at the wall's edge. Somewhere across that barrier, Stefan was perhaps filing his report, detailing how the American diplomat had mentioned the NATO construction timeline over dinner, how she had left her briefcase unattended while showering, how easy it had been to photograph the documents inside. Or perhaps he was lying awake, as conflicted as she was, caught between the state that owned him and the woman who had, against all training and logic, made him feel human again. The question that would haunt the next 72 hours was simple and impossible. Could she turn the hunter into the hunted? Could she transform betrayal into advantage? And most dangerous of all, could she do it without destroying the part of herself that still, foolishly, desperately loved him? Claire had arrived in Berlin in the winter of 1958, assigned to the American diplomatic mission with a cover as a cultural affairs liaison. Her real role was far less glamorous. She analyzed Soviet construction projects, identifying potential military installations disguised as civilian infrastructure. She spoke fluent German and passable Russian, could read architectural blueprints like sheet music, and had been trained at Camp Peary to seduce, deceive, and disappear without leaving fingerprints on anyone's life. Berlin was a city of performances, where everyone wore masks and the audience was always watching. The East German secret police, the Stasi, had perfected surveillance into an art form, recruiting one in every 50 citizens as informants, turning neighbors against neighbors, lovers against lovers. The West was little better, just more subtle about it. The CIA, MI6, and French intelligence waged their shadow war through dead drops, coded radio broadcasts, and the constant recruitment of defectors. Claire had been good at her job, excellent even. She had maintained her cover flawlessly, attended the right parties, cultivated the right sources, and kept her emotional distance. Until Stefan. They had met at a gallery opening in the French sector in May of 1960, almost a year ago now. He had been standing before a painting of the Spree River, hands in his pockets, head tilted in contemplation. She had noticed his shoes first, East German manufacture, slightly worn, marking him as someone from across the divide who had managed to secure a day pass. His face had been angular, intelligent, with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of a city that had forgotten how to dream. Their conversation had begun with art and drifted into architecture, his passion. He designed apartment blocks, he explained, trying to create beauty within the brutal constraints of socialist planning. He spoke of light, of how buildings could either trap people or set them free, of his belief that even in a divided world, spaces could be created where humanity persisted. She had been charmed, more than charmed. For the first time since arriving in Berlin, she had felt seen, not as an operative or a diplomat, but as a woman who also believed in impossible things. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully. He could only cross into the West on approved business, and her movements into the East were limited and monitored. They met at cafes near the border, took walks in the Tiergarten, attended concerts where the music said what they could not. He never asked about her work beyond polite inquiries. She never pressed him about his life in the East beyond what he volunteered. It had seemed like discretion, like two people protecting something fragile from the harsh machinery of politics. Now she understood. It had been tradecraft. Every casual question about her day, every moment alone in her apartment, every tender gesture had been calculated. The Stasi had identified her as a target, researched her background, found her vulnerabilities. They had sent Stefan, handsome and earnest and broken in just the right ways, to exploit the one weakness she had not adequately defended, her capacity to love. The morning after receiving the photograph, Claire went to work as usual. The American mission occupied a sturdy building near the Tiergarten, its windows reinforced, its phones swept daily for bugs. She moved through her routine with mechanical precision, attending briefings, reviewing reports, her mind elsewhere. At 1100 hours, she was summoned to a secure room in the basement. Her handler, a man named Douglas Kern, was waiting. He was in his 50s, gray-haired, with the patient demeanor of someone who had seen every variation of human weakness, and was no longer surprised by any of it. He gestured to a chair. Claire sat. The photograph of Stefan entering Stasi headquarters lay on the table between them, along with several others. Stefan meeting with a known Stasi officer at a cafe. Stefan photographing documents in what appeared to be her apartment, taken with a telephoto lens from a building across the street. The evidence was irrefutable. Kern lit a cigarette, studying her face. "You've been compromised," he said quietly. "The question is how badly." Claire kept her voice steady. "What has he accessed?" Kern slid a folder across the table. "Based on what we've observed, he's photographed at least 3 classified documents over the past 6 months. Construction schedules for NATO facilities, supply routes, personnel rotations. Nothing catastrophic yet, but enough to cause significant problems if it reaches Moscow." He paused. "We need to know if you've told him anything beyond what he's stolen." Claire met his gaze. "No, I followed protocol. I never discussed classified material in his presence." Kern nodded slowly. "Good. Then we have options." The standard procedure would be to arrest Stefan the next time he crossed into the West, interrogate him, use him for a prisoner exchange. But Kern leaned forward, and Claire saw something calculating in his expression. "Or," he said, "we could use him, feed him false intelligence. Let him think he's still operating successfully while we control the information flow. It's risky. It requires you to continue the relationship, to pretend you suspect nothing, to become the very thing he is. A liar in love." Claire felt something cold settle in her chest. "You want me to run a double game on my own boyfriend?" "Yes." Kern's voice was matter of fact. "Can you do it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Could she kiss Stefan knowing every touch was theater? Could she whisper endearments while calculating what false intelligence to leave visible? Could she weaponize intimacy the way he had? Claire thought of the Stefan she believed she knew. The man who brought her wildflowers from the east, rare blooms that did not grow in the west. The man who sketched her portrait on a napkin and told her she looked like hope. The man who might have been a performance from the beginning, or might have been something real trapped inside a terrible machinery neither of them controlled. Yes, she said, I can do it. The plan took shape over the next 48 hours. Claire would continue seeing Stefan, but now every interaction would be choreographed. The CIA would prepare false documents, convincing enough to pass Stasi scrutiny but containing subtly flawed information. Construction timelines would be shifted by weeks, supply routes would be altered, personnel lists would include fabricated names. Claire would leave these documents accessible during Stefan's visits, creating opportunities for him to photograph them. But the deception required more than just paperwork. It required emotional authenticity. Stefan was trained to detect lies, to read micro-expressions and physiological responses. If Claire seemed suddenly distant or overly affectionate, he would know something had changed. She had to be exactly as she had been, in love and trusting, while simultaneously orchestrating his betrayal. To manage the operation, Claire converted the small darkroom beneath her apartment into a command center. The building was old, built before the war, with a basement that had once been used for storage. She had set up photographic equipment there months ago as part of her cover, claiming an interest in developing her own film. Now, the darkroom became something else. A place where she could review surveillance footage, prepare false documents, and plan each move of the dangerous game she was playing. The walls were soundproofed, the door hidden behind a false panel. It was her war room, and she descended into it each night after Stefan left, shedding the performance of love like a costume and becoming, once again, an operative. Stefan called her on April 5th, 2 days after she had learned the truth. His voice on the phone was warm, familiar. "Claire, I have a pass for Saturday. Can we meet?" Her hand tightened on the receiver. Of course. The Tiergarten, the usual place. Yes. His voice dropped, intimate. "I've missed you." "I've missed you too," she said, and the terrible thing was that part of it was true. She had missed the Stefan she thought existed, even as she prepared to destroy the Stefan who actually did. They met on a gray Saturday afternoon, the sky threatening rain. Stefan was waiting by the lake, hands in the pockets of his coat, and when he saw her, his face brightened in a way that seemed utterly genuine. They walked together, talking about small things. A concert he had attended, a book she was reading. The conversation was easy, natural, and Claire felt the dissonance of it, the way she could simultaneously love him and hate him, trust the feeling while knowing the foundation was lies. They returned to her apartment as the rain began. She made coffee. He stood at her window, looking out at the wet streets, and said something about how the city looked different in the rain, softer somehow, the divisions less stark. Claire watched him, memorizing the line of his shoulders, the way his hair curled at his collar. She thought about the Stasi file that existed somewhere in East Berlin with her name on it, detailing her routines, her vulnerabilities, her weaknesses. She thought about the men in gray offices who had decided she was a target and had sent this man to exploit her. And she thought about the possibility, small but persistent, that somewhere in the machinery of his assignment, Stefan had also fallen. That his feelings, like hers, had become complicated and real. He turned from the window. "You're quiet today." She smiled, "Just tired. Work has been demanding." He crossed to her, took her hands. "You work too hard. You should take a break, come to the East for a visit, see where I live." It was a test, she realized, an attempt to gauge her trust, to see if she would willingly enter his territory. "I'd like that," she said. "Maybe soon." He kissed her and she kissed him back, and when he suggested staying the night, she agreed. Later, while he slept, she lay awake in the darkness, listening to his breathing. Her briefcase was on the table in the living room, positioned exactly where it needed to be. Inside were the false documents, prepared by Kern's team, detailing a fictional NATO construction project near the border. In the morning, while she showered, Stefan would photograph them. The game had begun. Over the next 3 weeks, Claire orchestrated a careful ballet of deception. She left documents accessible, always in ways that seemed natural, accidental. A folder left open on her desk, papers in her briefcase during a moment when she stepped out of the room. Each time, surveillance confirmed Stefan photographing them, but Claire added layers to the operation that went beyond simple intelligence work. She began writing him love letters, coded messages hidden in romantic language that her CIA handlers could monitor, but that also served a dual purpose. If Stefan was entirely cynical, the letters were simply part of her cover. But if any part of him had genuine feelings, the letters were a test, a way to see if he would respond with equal vulnerability. His replies came through a dead drop they had established, a loose brick in a wall near Checkpoint Charlie. The letters were tender, filled with longing and poetry. He wrote about a future after the wall when they could be together without borders. He wrote about loving her in ways that made the deception harder to maintain. Claire read each letter in her darkroom, analyzing the language for signs of manipulation or sincerity, and found herself unable to determine which it was. Perhaps both. Perhaps he was as trapped as she was, performing emotions that had become real, unable to separate the mission from the man. The strain began to show. Claire lost weight, slept poorly, found herself making small mistakes in her regular work. Kern noticed. "You need to be careful," he warned during one of their meetings. "You're getting too deep." "I'm fine," she said. But she wasn't. The line between Claire the operative and Claire the woman was blurring, and she no longer knew which version of herself was the performance. In early May, the operation escalated. Kern informed her that the false intelligence they had been feeding through Stefan was working. The Stasi had redirected resources based on the fabricated NATO construction project, leaving actual sites more vulnerable to Western intelligence gathering. But now they needed to push further. "We want you to stage a fight with him," Kern said. "Something public, something the Stasi will hear about. Make him think you're pulling away. It will force him to push harder, maybe make a mistake." Claire felt something twist in her chest. "You want me to break up with him?" "Not entirely, just create tension. Make him work to keep you. Make him reveal more of his hand." She agreed because she always agreed, because this was the job and she had chosen it. But that night, alone in her darkroom, she allowed herself to cry for the first time since the operation began, mourning something that had never really existed. The staged argument happened on May 15th at a cafe near the border. Claire had prepared her lines, rehearsed the emotions. She accused Stefan of being distant, of keeping secrets, of not truly caring about their future. He responded with confusion, then hurt, then anger. The fight escalated, voices rising, other patrons staring. Finally, Claire stood and walked out, leaving Stefan at the table, his face a mask of shock and pain. She knew the Stasi informants in the cafe would report the incident. She knew Stefan would be questioned, pressured to salvage the operation. What she did not anticipate was how much the performance would feel like truth, how the words she had scripted would tap into real frustrations and fears. That night Stefan came to her apartment unannounced. She heard his knock and froze, unprepared. When she opened the door, he looked wrecked, his eyes red, his usual composure shattered. "Claire, please, tell me what's wrong. Tell me what I've done." She let him in, and they stood in her living room, the space charged with genuine emotion beneath the layers of deception. "I feel like I don't know you," she said, and it was not a scripted line. "I feel like there's a part of you that's hidden that I can't reach." He took her hands, his grip almost desperate. I know it seems that way. But you have to understand, living in the East, there are things I can't talk about, things that aren't safe to share." "It doesn't mean I don't love you." The word hung between them. Love. He had never said it before, not directly. Claire searched his face, looking for the lie, and could not find it. Or perhaps she simply did not want to. They made love that night with an intensity that felt like grief, like two people clinging to something they both knew was slipping away. And afterwards, as Stefan slept, Claire descended to her darkroom and wrote a report for Kern, detailing every word, every gesture, analyzing the interaction for intelligence value. She felt like she was dissecting her own heart, cataloging its pieces for strategic advantage. By late May, the operation had produced significant results. The false intelligence had led to a major Stasi miscalculation, allowing Western forces to complete a critical tunnel operation beneath the border without detection. Kern was pleased. "You've done excellent work," he told Claire. "We're considering how to bring this to a close, extract you from the relationship cleanly." But there was a complication. Stefan had begun to act strangely. He was more attentive, more affectionate, but also more careful. He asked fewer questions about her work, seemed to avoid opportunities to be alone in her apartment. Claire realized with a cold certainty that he suspected. Somehow, despite all her precautions, Stefan knew or sensed that something had changed. The hunter had become aware of the trap. She reported this to Kern, who immediately convened an emergency meeting. "If he knows, we need to shut this down now. Arrest him, debrief him, end it." But Claire had another idea, one that formed in the sleepless hours of the night in the darkroom where she had spent so many hours analyzing and planning. "What if we force the confrontation? What if we make him choose?" Kern frowned. "Choose what? Between his mission and his feelings, between the Stasi and me. We arrange a meeting somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses. Checkpoint Charlie. We make it clear that I know, that he knows I know. And we see what he does." "It's too dangerous," Kern said. "If he's armed, if he decides to eliminate the problem, you could be killed." Claire met his eyes. "Then I'll be killed. But I think there's a chance, a real chance, that he's as conflicted as I am. And if that's true, we might be able to turn him. A real defection, not just a double game." Kern studied her for a long moment. "You're in love with him still, even knowing what he is." Claire did not deny it. "Yes. And I think he loves me too, which makes us both liabilities and assets. The question is which one matters more." After a long silence, Kern nodded. "One meeting. Checkpoint Charlie. June 1st. We'll have backup in place." "But Claire, if this goes wrong, if he's playing you one more time, you need to be prepared to walk away. Or to do what's necessary." She understood. In the world they inhabited, love was a weapon, and sometimes the only way to survive was to disarm yourself completely, to risk everything on the possibility that the person across from you was willing to do the same. The days leading up to June 1st passed in a strange suspension. Claire and Stefan continued to see each other, but the pretense had worn thin. Their conversations were careful, circling around the truth. Neither would speak. He knew she suspected. She knew he knew. And yet they continued the dance, because neither was ready to face what would happen when the music stopped. Claire spent her nights in the darkroom, not preparing intelligence reports, but writing letters she would never send. Letters to the Stefan she had imagined, the one who existed in the space between truth and lies. She wrote about what they could have been in a different world, a different time. She wrote about the cruelty of a system that turned human connection into a battlefield. And she wrote about the choice she was about to offer him, knowing it might destroy them both. On the morning of June 1st, she sent Stefan a message through their dead drop. A single line. Checkpoint Charlie. 8 p.m. I know. Meet me if you want the truth. She did not know if he would come. If he did, it could be to arrest her, to silence her, or to finally stop pretending. Kern positioned agents throughout the area, disguised as travelers, merchants, border guards. Claire would not be alone, but she would be exposed. At 7:30, she walked to Checkpoint Charlie, the most famous crossing point between East and West Berlin. The checkpoint was a study in contrasts. On the western side, bright lights, American flags, the bustle of a free society. On the eastern side, gray concrete, watchtowers, the oppressive machinery of surveillance. Between them, a strip of no man's land, a space that belonged to neither side and both. Claire positioned herself in the western zone just before the barrier, visible from both sides. The evening was cool, the sky darkening. Around her, people crossed back and forth, each passage a negotiation, a surrender of papers and dignity. She waited. 8 o'clock came and passed. She began to think he would not appear, that he had chosen the safety of his mission over the risk of truth. Then she saw him. Stefan emerged from the eastern side, walking slowly toward the checkpoint. He was alone, hands visible, no coat despite the chill. As he approached the barrier, the East German guard stopped him, questioned him. Claire could not hear the exchange, but she saw Stefan show papers, saw the guards confer. Finally, they let him pass into the no man's land, the space between worlds. He walked toward her, stopping at the white line that marked the division. They stood facing each other, 10 feet apart, separated by paint and ideology and all the lies they had told. Stefan spoke first, his voice carrying across the distance. "You know," "Yes," Claire said, "the photograph, the meetings, all of it." His face showed no surprise, only a deep weariness. "How long?" "Since April 3rd. 2 months." 2 months of performing, of pretending. Stefan looked away, toward the east, then back at her. "And yet you continued. You let me believe I was succeeding, because I was ordered to, because feeding you false intelligence served my mission." She paused, "and because I wanted to understand if any of it was real." He flinched as if struck. "Claire, I was assigned to you. That's true. The Stasi identified you as a target, researched your background, sent me to exploit your vulnerabilities. Everything you suspect is correct." The words should have hurt, but Claire had lived with the truth for 2 months. She was numb to it now, and I fell in love with you anyway." His voice broke. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first night at the gallery. Maybe later when you laughed at something I said and I realized I wanted to make you laugh again. But somewhere in the mission, I stopped pretending. The feelings became real. And I've been trapped ever since, serving a state I no longer believe in, betraying a woman I love, unable to escape either." Claire felt tears on her face, cold in the evening air. "I don't know if I believe you. I don't know if I can." "I understand." Stefan's hands clenched at his sides. "If I were you, I wouldn't believe me either. But I'm here. I came, knowing you could have me arrested, knowing this could be the end. I came because I'm tired of lying, to you, to myself." The checkpoint around them continued its rhythm, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Claire took a breath. "I'm offering you a choice. Defect. Come to the West. Tell us everything you know about Stasi operations. Help us protect the people you've put at risk. And maybe we can find out if what we had was real." Stefan's face showed anguish. "If I defect, they'll kill my family. My mother, my sister. The Stasi doesn't forgive betrayal. They'll make examples of them. Claire had anticipated this. We can negotiate. Prisoner exchanges. Extraction operations. It's not guaranteed, but there are possibilities. He shook his head slowly. You're asking me to trade their lives for mine. For ours. I can't do that. Then what? Claire's voice rose, frustration breaking through. We continue this. You go back, report this conversation, and we become enemies officially instead of secretly. Stefan stepped closer to the line, his eyes locked on hers. Or I stay in the East. I continue my work. But I feed you real intelligence. I become your asset truly. I risk everything, my life, my family's safety, to try to undo some of the damage I've caused. A double agent. Claire's mind raced. It was more dangerous than defection, more valuable strategically, and more likely to end in Stefan's death. You'd be constantly monitored. One mistake and they'd execute you. I know. Then why? Because maybe it's the only way I can prove to you that what I feel is real. Because maybe betraying the people who turned love into a weapon is the only moral choice left. Because I'd rather die trying to protect you than live safely having destroyed you. The words hung in the cold air between them. Claire thought of Kern, watching from somewhere nearby, waiting for her signal. She thought of the operation, the intelligence value, the strategic calculations. And she thought of the woman she had been before Berlin, before the lies, before she learned that the heart could be both the strongest and most vulnerable thing a person possessed. Claire made her decision. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, tossing it across the line. Stefan caught it reflexively. It was a film canister, the kind used in her darkroom. Inside was a roll of microfilm containing real NATO intelligence, significant but not catastrophic, enough to establish Stefan's credibility with his handlers if he chose to use it. Or, she said quietly, you can destroy it. Throw it in the spree tonight. Walk away from all of this. Disappear into the East, live your life, forget about me and the game we've been playing. Stefan stared at the canister in his hand. If I use this, I'm committing treason against the West. If I destroy it, I'm confirming to the Stasi that I've been compromised and they'll arrest me. Either way, I'm choosing a side. Yes, Claire said, that's exactly what you're doing. And I need to know which side you choose. Not for my mission, for me. Stefan looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw the same exhaustion, the same longing, the same impossible hope that she felt. I choose you, but not the way you think. He pocketed the film canister. I'll deliver this to my handlers. I'll convince them I'm still operational. And then I'll start feeding you everything. Troop movements, surveillance operations, the names of Western agents they've identified. I'll burn my own side to protect yours, but I have one condition. Claire waited. You have to promise me that if it goes wrong, if they catch me, you won't try to save me. You'll let me face the consequences. Because if you try to intervene, they'll know you're running me and it will compromise everything. She wanted to argue, to refuse, but she understood the logic. In their world, love was a luxury and survival required sacrifice. I promise. Stefan nodded slowly. Then we have an agreement. He turned to go, then paused. Claire. Yes. In another life, in a world without walls, I would have loved you honestly. I would have been the man you deserved. I know, she said, I would have let you. He walked back toward the eastern checkpoint, the film canister in his pocket, a man choosing treason as an act of love. Claire watched him go, knowing she might never see him again, knowing that the intelligence he would provide could save lives, and that his own life was now measured in borrowed time. Kern appeared at her side, materializing from the shadows. Did he agree? Yes. He's ours now. Kern studied her face. And you? Are you his? Claire thought about the question, about the darkroom beneath her apartment where she had planned betrayals and written love letters, about the impossibility of separating duty from desire in a city built on division. I don't know, she said finally. Maybe that's the point. Maybe in Berlin you can't be one thing or the other. You're always both. Over the next 6 months, Stefan proved his value. The intelligence he provided was extraordinary. He revealed Stasi surveillance networks, identified double agents within Western organizations, and provided advance warning of operations that saved lives. He communicated through dead drops, coded messages hidden in architectural journals, brief encounters at approved cultural events. Each piece of intelligence was a risk, each transmission a gamble with his life. Claire ran him, meeting with Kern regularly to debrief and plan. But she also continued to see Stefan, carefully, rarely, maintaining the appearance of a relationship that had cooled but not ended. Their meetings were brief, public, always monitored. They spoke in careful language, every word potentially overheard. But sometimes, in a glance or a touch, they communicated what could not be said aloud. That they were trapped together in a game neither could win. That they had chosen each other in the only way their world allowed. That love, in Berlin, was an act of resistance. In November of 1961, Stefan missed a scheduled dead drop. Then another. Claire felt panic rise, cold and sharp. Kern initiated inquiries through back channels. The news came 3 days later. Stefan Richter had been arrested by the Stasi on suspicion of espionage. He was being held at Hohenschönhausen prison, the facility where the Stasi conducted its most brutal interrogations. Claire demanded an extraction operation. Kern refused. It's too risky. We'd expose our entire network. And he made you promise not to intervene. That was the deal. Claire felt something break inside her, so we just let him die. We honor his sacrifice by using the intelligence he provided. We protect the operations he made possible. That's how this works. You know that, she did know. But knowing did not make it easier. For weeks she waited for news, hoping for a miracle. None came. Then in early December, a package arrived at the American mission, addressed to Claire. Inside was a single photograph, taken by the Stasi. It showed Stefan in a prison cell, thin and bruised but alive. On the back, in his handwriting, were 3 words: "No regrets. Remember me." Claire kept the photograph in her darkroom, the only personal item in that space of secrets and strategies. She did not know if Stefan had been executed or imprisoned, if he had broken under interrogation or held firm. The Stasi did not share such information. But she knew that he had made his choice, had traded his life for hers, had transformed betrayal into something that resembled redemption. The intelligence he provided led to the successful completion of several major operations, including the tunnel networks beneath Berlin that would operate for years. His sacrifice reshaped Western understanding of Stasi methods and saved countless lives. But the official record would never acknowledge him. He was a traitor to the East and an asset to the West, a man who existed in the space between, remembered by no one except the woman who had loved him and destroyed him in equal measure. Years later, after the wall fell and the archives were opened, Claire returned to Berlin. She was older then, retired from the agency, living a quiet life far from the city of her youth. But she needed to know. She spent weeks in the Stasi archives, searching through files, looking for Stefan's name. She found it finally, in a document dated December 15, 1961. Stefan Richter had been convicted of espionage and sentenced to death. The execution had been carried out on December 20, 1961, at Hohenschönhausen prison. He had refused to name his Western contacts, had maintained his silence through weeks of interrogation, and had died without betraying her. The file included a final statement, recorded by the prison officials. When asked if he had any last words, Stefan had said only this: "Tell her it was real. Tell her I chose correctly." Claire stood in the archive reading room, the file open before her, and felt the weight of decades collapse into a single moment. She had spent her life in service to ideals, had made sacrifices and compromises, had learned to live with moral ambiguity and necessary evils. But Stefan's choice, his final act, had been unambiguous. He had loved her enough to die for it, and she had loved him enough to let him. The question that had haunted her since that night at Checkpoint Charlie finally had an answer. In a city built on division, in a world that demanded choosing sides, they had found a third option. Not east or west, not duty or desire, but something that transcended the binary. They had chosen each other, knowing the cost, accepting the consequences. It had not been enough to save them, but it had been enough to make them human in a system designed to reduce people to assets and targets. Claire closed the file and left the archives. Outside, Berlin was transformed, the wall gone, the city reunited, the Cold War a memory. But she carried Stefan with her, the weight of his sacrifice, the gift of his final message. It was real. She had spent 40 years wondering, and now she knew. The love had been real, the betrayal had been real, the choice had been real, and in the end, in the city of lies, that truth was the only thing that mattered. She never spoke publicly about Stefan Richter. His story remained classified, buried in files that few would ever read. But sometimes, late at night, she would remember April 3, 1961, the photograph slipping from her fingers, the moment when everything changed. And she would wonder if he had known, even then, how it would end. If he had chosen her knowing it would cost him everything. If love, in their impossible world, had always been a form of espionage, a way of stealing something precious from the machinery of power. The answer, she believed, was yes, and that made all the difference.